Buckle up, because what you are about to see can no longer be dishonestly dismissed as a conspiracy theory. You are about to see the damning evidence and hear the testimony that the mainstream media has deliberately hidden from you for the last 25 years, proving that we were lied to about the events of 9/11 and who was behind them, with the evidence of the cover-up being just as damning.
You don't have everybody moving in the same direction without there being a head coach somewhere who is giving them instructions as to where he wants them to move.
So that includes before and after the events?
Primarily before the event. After the event, it shifts from being an action that supports the activities of the Saudis to actions that cover up the results of that permission given to the Saudis to act.
So could you explain particularly this last couple of sentences? Primarily before the event, after the event, it shifts from being an action that supports the activities to the Saudis to actions that cover up the results of that permission given to the Saudis to act. So can you elaborate on that?
Well, I'll get to the why question. Why would the U.S. government have done this? And let me say, I no longer use the words cover up to describe what's going on. I find more accurately the words aggressive deception. The federal government has attempted to rewrite the narrative of 9/11 in order to exclude the role of the Saudis from that horrific story.
The most celebrated soldier of the last decade, David Petraeus, what did he do when he retired? He went to Colbert Kravis Roberts, a Wall Street buyout firm with $90 billion in assets under management.
General David Petraeus was a well-known commander of U.S. forces fighting al-Qaeda in Iraq during the Second Gulf War, and he later served as director of the CIA. Recently, at the 2025 Concordia Summit, many watched incredulously as he not only welcomed longtime al-Qaeda leader Ahmed al-Sharaa to the stage as the newly installed U.S.-approved president of Syria, but he effusively praised and admired the al-Qaeda leader's character and accomplishment. It's something you have to actually see with your own eyes to believe.
Please join again in welcoming President Ahmed al-Sharaa to the stage. Assalamu alaikum, Sayyid Rais.
Ahlan wa sahlan.
Ahlan wa sahlan. And Sharafna Sayyidi.
He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, he said, I just got this down from upstairs from the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, this is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran.
Why did they do it? I think there are a number of reasons. Some of them relate to the long-time special personal relationship between the Bush family and the Saudi kingdom. Goes back 3 generations to Herbert Walker Bush's father, Prescott Bush, from a senator from Connecticut.
The agents in Minnesota were so worried that the case itself would be covered up. In order to prevent this embarrassment that, that there was a terrorist connection already known, and there are things about this terrorist connection. For instance, our acting supervisor, August 23rd, 24th, in arguing with headquarters to go for this warrant, and the guy was saying, no, we can't do it. Our acting supervisor had said, this is a guy who could fly into the World Trade Center. And that was said in August 2001. Can you imagine how embarrassing this is? And of course, Mueller knows it. He knows that was even said very quickly. Now, and of course, so for 3 weeks, he's saying, Well, if we had known, we may have been able to prevent it. I tried to call the director, and this is after 9/11, to get him to stop saying that, because I said, oh my gosh, when this comes out. And I knew there had been emails flying between our office and headquarters. I didn't know there were 70 emails.
Worldwide on the web, thank you for tuning in. This is a very special episode. I'm going to get right to it because we don't, I know we're going to run out of time so quickly, but I'm going to be I'm going to be making the show if it's possible, because you guys know I always try to be real for you, because you don't get that in the news. Ever since I started in talk radio back in Florida years ago in the mid-90s, where I was taking phone calls and stirring it up with a midday talk show about hot topics in the news. And that's pretty much a dead thing. It's becoming a dead thing now that all the conglomerates have bought up all the independent radio stations. They don't want people's voices heard. They control who gets access to the airwaves, and that's a threat. They don't want the people's voices readily heard in communities. So back when I started in talk radio, that was my priority. And then I've continued that with the Connie Bryan show on television and cable access, because the media, the news media, is a joke. It doesn't report the news. It creates something that it thinks will entertain you, and it controls what you see and leaves out often the most important stuff. And the most important stuff is what we're going to be talking about tonight. I'm going to be showing you a lot of clips that you won't see in the mainstream media. Let's start with the Eisenhower military-industrial complex clip. Now, I know a lot of you have seen this, but believe it or not, every time this clip is shown, there's a lot of young people who haven't seen this. So we're going to go ahead and roll that to get started here.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together. The prospect of domination of the nation's scholars by federal employment, project allocations, and the power of money is ever present and is gravely to be regarded. Yet in holding scientific research and discovery in respect, as we should, we must also be alert to the equal and opposite danger that public policy could itself become the captive of a scientific, technological elite. We must also be alert to the equal and opposite danger that public policy could itself become the captive of a scientific, technological elite.
Unfortunately, it's too late to guard against that threat that President Eisenhower, as he was leaving office, was warning us about. Our government has been compromised by this threat for some time now. There's an elite, uber-wealthy power, elite beyond even what is often referred to as the 1%. I'm talking even more of a smaller percentile. And it has strong tentacles in a dangerous hybrid of areas, including not just the military-industrial complex. It's deeply into that, but not just that. Related monopolizing corporations also. Deep tentacles in our national intelligence departments. They have an empire-building, control the world agenda at all costs, and they see you and I as nothing but commodities and sheep to be pacified, used, and exploited in their agenda. Now, I want to share with you John F. Kennedy's clip where he talks about this too.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed.
This deep state, or whatever you want to call it, that word is thrown around so much anymore, this power-hungry kind of secretive effort that's controlling and pulling the strings of our government now, they're willing to do anything to accomplish their empire-building world agenda, including using levels of violence that would be beyond our comprehension, with any and all loss of human life by us being seen as necessary collateral damage in the interest of their idea for the world and their profit motives. Let's don't forget that. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, I never have been, but that doesn't mean that there aren't conspiracies out there and that we need to guard against it and not be afraid to talk about it because we might be branded a conspiracy theorist. More and more patriotic Americans are beginning to be willing to do that, beginning to wake up and realize, as we try to figure out how to take our country back from the anti-American, anti-democratic, anti-constitutional, monopolizing corporatism that has replaced the democratic capitalism that our forefathers intended. And this corporatism has corrupted our country's leadership and values. Just like I showed you a few minutes ago, JFK warned us about this, just like Eisenhower did. He was very vocal about standing up to it. He referred to it as a secret society, shadow government that had a secret agenda that it wanted to keep from Americans in general. That was JFK saying that, not just Connie. It wasn't long after JFK spoke of his commitment to stand up to those with such an agenda that he was assassinated. And just like the events of 9/11, because that's where we're going tonight, there was a huge organized lie, a huge organized government lie that was sold to the American people about JFK's assassination as well. Take a look at this clip now. I'm going to try to move quickly to get as many of these clips in as I can. Take a look at this clip now from Bill Moyer's Deep State, Hiding in Plain Sight. And listen to how author Mike Lofgren describes it.
This has evolved over time.
And you call it the real power in the country.
Correct. It is a hybrid of corporate America and the national security state. Everyone knows what the military-industrial complex is, since Eisenhower talked about it in his farewell address.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes.
Everyone knows Wall Street and its depredations. Everyone knows how corporate America acts. They're both about the same thing. They're both about money, sucking as much money out of the country as they can, and they're about control, corporate control and political control.
You said this, in your judgment, is the big story of our time.
It is the big story of our time. It is, I would say, the red thread that runs through the history of the last 3 decades. It's how we had deregulation, financialization of the economy, the Wall Street bust, the erosion of our civil liberties, and perpetual war.
You write that the secret and unaccountable deep state floats freely above the gridlock between both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue is the paradox of American government in the 21st century.
Well, that's just the thing. The common narrative of the last 5 years, and on a superficial level it's right, is that government is broken, it's dysfunctional, it's gridlocked. Well, that's true, and that is the visible government, the constitutional government we learn about in Civics 101, and it is gridlocked. But somehow Obama can go into Libya, he can assassinate U.S. citizens, he can collect all our phone records without a by your leave from anyone. He can even bring down a jet carrying a president of a sovereign country without asking anyone's permission, and no one seems to connect the two. The failure of our visible constitutional state and this other government that operates according to no constitutional rules or any constraint by the governed.
You go on to say, though, that it's not just the executive branch that is the heart of this, that it's just one of the several constituencies that make up what you call the deep state.
Well, it's all the national security functions of the government. It's the Pentagon, it's Homeland Security, it's the State Department. It's also Treasury, because they have a kind of symbiotic relationship with Wall Street.
For one thing, they control the flow of money.
Absolutely. And that's why there's such a flow not only of money but of personnel between Wall Street and the Treasury Department. There's other aspects of government. There's a portion of the judiciary, a small portion of the judiciary, the so-called Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Courts. Most of Congress doesn't even know how they operate.
Talk a little bit more about the nexus, the connection between the national security state and Wall Street, because this is a theme that runs through your essay.
In both cases of the national security state and the corporate state, they are sucking money out of the economy. As our infrastructure collapses, we have a tinker toy power grid that goes out every time there's inclement weather. Tens of millions of people are on food stamps. We incarcerate more people than China, an authoritarian state with 4 times our population. Does anyone see the disparity between this extravagance for the deep state and the penury that is being forced on the rest of the country. That isn't a natural evolution. Something made it happen. We're having a situation where the deep state is essentially out of control, it's unconstrained. Since 9/11, we have built the equivalent of 3 Pentagons around the DC metropolitan area, holding defense contractors, intelligence contractors, and government civilians involved in the military-industrial complex. There are over 400,000 contractors, private citizens, who have top-secret security clearances.
And they are heart and soul of the deep state, as you describe it.
Absolutely.
They're being privatized, which means the power shifts from accountable officials to unaccountable contractors.
About 70% of the intelligence budget goes to contracts.
How new is this? I mean, back in 2010, the Washington Post published a stunning investigation of what the editors called Top Secret America. I mean, we have known about this, have we not?
Yes, we know about this, but the intelligence functions of the government are too important to outsource in the manner we have. It's something where absolute discretion is needed and absolute trust that they are not violating civil liberties. And to put this kind of a burden, if you will, on private contract employees is, I think, become a great disservice.
You say that you came to question this. It took you a while. It was a gradual enlightenment that took place. You were dealing with big numbers and particular details in the budgets that all of these agencies were sending to you when you were on Capitol Hill, right? You were seeing the numbers.
Absolutely.
And what was happening to the numbers?
At the end of 2001 is we appropriated a lot of money, and it didn't seem to be going to Afghanistan, the proximate source of the 9/11 attacks. It seemed to be going to the Persian Gulf region, and I said, what's going on here? Saddam Hussein didn't bring down the Twin Towers. So the little light went on, and I began to sort of disenchant myself from the normal groupthink that tends to take over in any organization.
Groupthink. At some point in your essay, you talk about how groupthink drives the deep state.
It absolutely does, just as it tends to drive any bureaucratic organization.
What do you mean by groupthink?
Well, the psychologist Irving Janis called it groupthink. It's a kind of assimilation of the views of your superiors and your peers. It's becoming a yes man. And in many respects, it's an unconscious thing.
I remember what Upton Sinclair once said, it's difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on him not understanding it.
That is certainly a part of it.
You describe Washington as clearly and obviously the headquarters of the deep state, but talk about some of the others who are in the game.
Wall Street is perhaps the ultimate backstop to the whole operation because they generate so much money that they can provide second careers for a lot of the government operatives. They're going to make more money than they ever dreamed they would on Wall Street. And I think a good example of that is the most celebrated soldier of the last decade, David Petraeus. What did he do when he retired? He went to Kohlberg Kravis Roberts, a Wall Street buyout firm with $90 billion in assets under management.
You describe him as a kind of avatar of the deep state.
He is, in a way, because he now represents both ends of it. We see now our present-day Cincinnatus did not pick up the plow when he laid down the sword.
Cincinnatus was the Roman who left his farm to become a general in the war. When the war was over, he went back to be a farmer. That doesn't happen today.
No, it doesn't. The vast majority of generals seem to end up on the boards of defense contractors.
General David Petraeus was a well-known commander of U.S. forces fighting al-Qaeda in Iraq during the Second Gulf War, and he later served as director of the CIA. Recently, at the 2025 Concordia Summit, many watched incredulously as he not only welcomed longtime al-Qaeda leader Ahmed al-Sharaa to the stage as the newly installed U.S.-approved president of Syria, but he effusively praised and admired the al-Qaeda leader's character and accomplishment. It's something you have to actually see with your own eyes to believe.
Please join again in welcoming President Ahmed al-Sharaa to the stage. Assalamu alaikum, Sayyid Rais.
Ahlan wa sahlan.
Ahlan wa sahlan. And Sharafna Sayyidi. As you know, Mr. President, I spent over 37 years in the U.S. Army, and I was a soldier, not a diplomat. So I hope you'll forgive me if I speak with the directness of the old soldier that I am as I get the first question out of the way. Because the fact is that we were on different sides when I was commanding the surge in Iraq. You were, of course, detained by U.S. forces for some 5 years, including, again, when I was the 4-star there. And here you are now as the president of Syria, which your forces liberated from the murderous Bashar al-Assad regime to participate in your first UN General Assembly as the president of your country. Earlier this year, you met the President of the United States among many other world leaders. Please help us understand how you got from al-Qaeda in Iraq 20 years ago to where you are today, Syria's head of state on stage in New York City.
Yes, I'm sure the families of those who died from al-Qaeda's attacks on 9/11 would like to hear the real answer to that question, as would the families of those who died and lost body parts during the Iraq War fighting al-Qaeda and the War on Terror, but that you downplay now with the colossal understatement that you were just on different sides back then. And I'm certain they'd also like to know how the hell you could now be not just welcoming the head of al-Qaeda in Syria to the U.S., but effusively praising him and telling him how much you admire him now. But we already know the answer to that question, General Petraeus, and we of course also know better than to think the honest answer to that question would ever be forthcoming from either one of you here.
All right, it's time for a pop quiz. How many of you are familiar with what are known as the 28 pages? And I'm talking with respect to the joint congressional investigation into the events of 9/11. Because of how the news media is bought and controlled by corporate powers that have replaced reporting the news with creating the news, they want you to hear the news the way they want to package it and limit it, is a better way to put it. The vast majority of you, because of that, have no clue. You've never heard of the 28 pages. The news media didn't want you to be familiar with it because they're controlled by corporations, all right? Instead of having the public interest at heart, they have a corporate agenda at heart, as we've been talking about. Well, thank goodness for cable access, right? Because otherwise, you wouldn't learn about them tonight. You wouldn't learn about these things. The 28 pages are some of the most important news you'll ever learn about. It doesn't get more important or more newsworthy than this topic. Question for you. Why did we have not just one, but two official investigations into the events of 9/11? Obviously to learn about who was behind the terrorist attacks, who financed it, who enabled those 19 hijackers, right? Well, the 28 pages were an entire chapter that was redacted and withheld from you, the American people, in the final report of the first investigation conducted by the Joint Congressional Committees led by well-respected Senators Bob Graham and U.S. Representative Porter Goss. The 28 pages was withheld from you by none other than George W. Bush and his point man at the FBI. I hope you're sitting down, because this shocked me when I learned it. Bob Mueller. Bob Mueller was the point man director at the FBI who followed, like a dutiful soldier, George Bush's directive to keep the 28 pages from your knowledge for 15 years until Barack Obama finally declassified the 28 pages just before he left office, I think about a year before he left. George Bush was known to be very close friends with Saudi ambassador to the U.S., Prince Bandar. He was the Saudi ambassador to the United States, and he was of the Saudi royal family. Those 28 pages have everything to do with revealing to the American people the answer we so needed regarding who financed 9/11. They contain powerful evidence that implicated Prince Bandar, several other Saudi officials connected to the Saudi government and the Saudi royal family, and President Bush, assisted by FBI Director Bob Mueller, ordered that evidence uncovered by the Joint Congressional Committee to be withheld from the American people. And like I said, they were finally made public, thank goodness, by President Obama 15 years later. So much lost time. But you had no idea because the mainstream media didn't want you to have any idea about it. And yet, this is, like I said, some of the most important news the American people need to heal after 9/11. And if only now learning about this makes you angry, good. Because that means there's hope for America. If it doesn't make you angry and you shrug your shoulders, then you're a sheep, okay? So from now on, when you answer your phone, your cell phone, you need to answer it. That needs to be your ringtone, too. Now, Senator Bob Graham is one of the most ethical and trusted individuals who served our country in our lifetimes. I grew up in Florida before moving out here to California in 2002, and I remember when Senator Graham was the very well-respected governor, before he was senator, of Florida for 2 terms, after which he then went on to serve 18 years as a senator. As I said earlier, he was co-chairman of the Joint Congressional Inquiry into 9/11. Listen now to what he has to say in the following clips.
The fact that it was so pervasive that virtually all of the agencies of the federal government were moving in the same direction, from a customs agent at an airport in Orlando who was chastised when he denied entry in the United States to a Saudi, to the President of the United States authorizing large numbers of Saudis to leave the country, possibly denying us forever important insights and information on what happened. You don't have everybody moving in the same direction without there being a head coach somewhere who is giving them instructions as to where he wants them to move.
So that includes before and after the events?
Primarily before the event. After the event, it shifts from being an action that supports the activities of the Saudis to actions that cover up the results of that permission given to the Saudis to act.
So could you explain particularly this last couple of sentences? Primarily before the event, after the event, it shifts from being an action that supports the activities to the Saudis to actions that cover up the results of that permission given to the Saudis to act. So can you elaborate on that?
Well, and I'll get to the why question. Why would the U.S. government have done this. And let me say, I no longer use the words cover up to describe what's going on. I find more accurately the words aggressive deception. The federal government has attempted to rewrite the narrative of 9/11 in order to exclude the role of the Saudis from that horrific story. Why did they do it? I think there are a number of reasons. Some of them relate to the long-time special personal relationship between the Bush family and the Saudi kingdom. It goes back 3 generations to Herbert Walker Bush's father, Prescott Bush, from a senator from Connecticut. I think it also involves the long relationship that started in World War II when the United States essentially committed to provide security to the Saudis committed to provide a reliable source of petroleum to the United States and its allies. But I think there's another issue here, and that is, if you'll recall, at the World Trade Center after 9/11, the president with a bullhorn said words to the effect that we are going to follow anyone who was found to have been in any way connected to this murder, and that we will follow them to the ends of the earth. Pretty strong words. And certainly shortly thereafter, much of the information that you have outlined became available to the president. Problem: the president wanted to go to war with Iraq, and he has painted at the site of the crime a path that looks like it's going directly to the Saudis, but that's not the destination he wants. So what do? You have to suppress all the information that would cause people to think that the Saudis were the people that he was talking about with the bullhorn at the World Trade Center, and get the country prepared and willing to go to war against a country which was subsequently found out to have virtually, if not totally, nothing to do.
Right, but Bob, I know you have to leave, but so I just want to focus on this line. You don't have everybody moving in the same direction without there being a head coach somewhere who's giving them instructions as to where he wants them to move. And that's in reference to me talking about the various examples of American intelligence agencies that in fact did generate intelligence that could have prevented 9/11 if it had been followed up. And I had asked you if there was a deliberate culture created to the American intelligence agencies of not wanting to know, which in itself could prohibit the sharing of information that people talk about. You mentioned to me in this interview that in the famous memo, bin Laden plans to attack the United States, that in the subsequent memo that usually goes out to heads of agencies, that was omitted, which one would think would have gone to head of agencies in order to take precautions. You mentioned the immigration, the border official who's chastised. This was because there'd been a guideline handed down from the White House, if I understand it correctly, not to stop Saudis from coming into the country, even if under normal protocol you would have stopped them. So who's the coach?
Well, I think the coach is the President of the United States. He's the only one who could have commanded agencies from the Department of State to the Treasury Department to the intelligence community to the FBI and other law enforcement agencies to all act in the same manner, because they are all ultimately responsible to the president.
So, I mean, that does suggest that given the president's relationship with Bandar and lots of evidence that Bandar is in the thick of the 9/11 conspiracy, that it's very likely that I don't know how else to say this, President Bush and I assume Dick Cheney, who was up to his eyeballs in this as well, create a culture of not wanting to know amongst the intelligence agencies. And it starts with the demotion of Richard Clarke, who was the anti-terrorism czar. And apparently, even after George Tenet briefs President Bush, in his first briefing, according to Tenet, he tells Bush the #1 national security threat to the United States is Al-Qaeda and bin Laden. And then he demotes the guy who's supposed to be in charge of the fight against Al-Qaeda and bin Laden, Richard Clarke. And is there not, at the very least, a very strong suggestion that the back door was open for this type of attack? I don't know if there's any evidence the White House knew what was coming, but Bandar certainly had a pretty good idea what was coming.
Again, these are exactly the questions to which I hope that the information that was gathered subsequent to the writing of the 28 pages, in response in many cases to the trails that were first outlined. Of course, we've lost 13 years. We should have been doing this not in 2016, but in 2002, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc. But we are where we are. So, and many people are asking, you know, does it make any difference now? 15 years later, why don't we move on? A prominent official in the FBI told me in 2011 to get a life, to stop pestering them about this. I think it makes a lot of difference. Justice to the families that have suffered so grievously, our national security, the Saudis thinking that they have a status of immunity from the United States, have continued to fund terrorist organizations and continued to train the next generation of terrorists in Wahhabist mosques and schools, feeling that there's going to be no negative reaction from the United States. I think this has had an enormously detrimental impact on the American people. The presidential election is now well underway, and we're every day seeing the depth of public cynicism and a sense of disconnection between the government and the people. And I believe that acts of secrecy, such as we've been talking about, are a significant part of that public attitude.
Can I suggest an alternative theory, if all this is true, what might have motivated it, is that a real convergence of interest between the Saudi regime and the President Bush and Dick Cheney and the neocons around them. We know there's a document that comes out called Project for a New American Century, which essentially calls for regime change, first of all in Iraq, then in Syria, and the ultimate prize being Iran.
I seem to recall General Wesley Clark in a powerful, eye-opening Democracy Now! Interview with Amy Goodman, revealing similar shocking classified information that was revealed to him immediately after the events of 9/11.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who used to work for me. And one of the generals called me in. He said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper. He said, I just got this down from upstairs from the Secretary of Defense's office today. And he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years." starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran.
And we know the Saudis are extremely motivated to try to overthrow the regime in Iran. They hate the Iranians, and it frames itself as hating Shia. And it's certainly a convergence of interest between the Saudi government and al-Qaeda that hate Shia probably more than they hate America. And of course, Bush-Cheney's stated objective was regime change in Iran. They wanted, in fact, there was a time where they hoped to go to war with Iran, and perhaps only generals from the Pentagon stopped it from happening. That there was a real convergence of interest to create the conditions of what was called in that Project for a New American Century, the need for a new Pearl Harbor, that they're conniving in this. There's no other way to say it.
A lot of intriguing questions. I hope that we will have some answers. I only hope we don't have to wait another decade and a half to get at the business of providing those answers.
Okay, now, check out this next clip of Senator Graham speaking to the National Press Club, explaining how there are still other redacted, withheld investigative reports into the 16 other hijackers that were also completely withheld and redacted, still to this day.
Most of the information, the 28 pages, was derived from 3 of the 19 hijackers, the 3 who lived in San Diego. The other 16 hijackers lived across the country, primarily in places like Florida, Virginia, New Jersey. There were investigations conducted in each of those and other places, which have also been classified and withheld. Now that the bottle is open, what is likely to pour forth? I think there are 3 casks into which the liquid will flow. One is in the 28 pages were written in the fall of 2002, but were not, in a number of instances, completed. We were under a mandate to submit our final report before the end of that session of Congress, which meant by the end of December of 2002, and there were some issues that had not been taken fully to ground. As an example, the role of Prince Bandar, the long Saudi ambassador to the United States. In the 28 pages, it's disclosed that in the book of Abu Zubaydah, one of bin Laden's closest operatives, were the telephone numbers, which were otherwise unavailable, to Bandar's mansion in Aspen and to his bodyguard here in Washington. There was also information about the fact that both he and his wife had been involved in money transfers which appeared to go to the mentors and protectors of the 3 hijackers in San Diego. Was that where that money flow ended, or did it end up supporting the hijackers? That's the kind of questions which were raised in the 28 pages, but I hope that we will now get information to close those loops. Second, there has been a number of developments since December of 2002. In the fall of 2011, an author, Anthony Summers, and the journalist Dan Christensen disclosed the fact that there had been 3 of the hijackers who had lived for a period of time near Sarasota, Florida, while they were taking their flight training. These 3 included Mohammed Atta, who was thought to be the leader of the 19, and that while here, those 3 had significant contacts with a prominent Saudi family, which left the United States after 6 years of residence in Sarasota for Saudi Arabia under what were described as urgent conditions. A new car left in front of the house, food in the refrigerator, clothes in the clothes washer. when that story was surfaced, the FBI's response was, in a public statement, that it had done a complete investigation of the situation in Sarasota, that it had found no connections between the hijackers and the prominent Saudi family, and that all that information had been made available to both the Congressional Joint Inquiry and the Citizens 9/11. I was able to quickly determine that the third statement was incorrect. We searched the records of both the 9/11 Commission and the Congressional Joint Inquiry, talked to the leadership and chief staff of those, and found that they had never received any information about the situation in Sarasota. I happen to have the opportunity to look at two of the investigative reports written by the FBI agent in charge of the 6 months investigation, and he said that there were many connections between the three hijackers and the Saudi family. And subsequently, in a released document through the Freedom of Information Act, that report is now publicly available with the statement that there were many connections. And second, that the investigation was not complete, that there were other leads that had been suggested by the agent in charge which were not pursued. I believe there are other examples of information like this that will be available when the investigative reports from places like Falls Church and Southeast Florida and Patterson, New Jersey become available. The third area, it will be judicial. The families of 9/11 have been litigating to try to establish the relationship between the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and entities and the 19 hijackers. Those efforts have been frustrated with the support of the U.S. Department of Justice and State, which has sided with the Saudis on this issue, but an interpretation of a 1970 sovereign immunity law has been effectively raised by the Saudis to not only cause there to be the dismissal of actions against the kingdom, but against many of the entities within Saudi Arabia. There is currently legislation in the Congress. It had passed the United States Senate unanimously, which would provide an exception to that 1970s law in the circumstances similar to 9/11, where there was a alleged foreign government involvement with a terrorist organization that resulted in harm to Americans on U.S. soil. That matter is pending in the House of Representatives, and I hope that it will act during this session, ideally before the 15th anniversary of 9/11. The question is raised, why are you doing this? What, 15 years later, what difference does this make? Get a life. I was told that by the Deputy Director of the FBI. The answer, I think, is threefold. One is justice. These almost 3,000 American victims and their families deserve justice. They deserve the right in a court of law to be able to present the evidence that they have gathered, which is voluminous, that will link the kingdom and other entities of Saudi Arabia to the 19 hijackers. The second is national security. These are the facts. The Saudis have heard the message from the United States, including the defense that has been provided by two of its major executive agencies, the Department of Justice, the Department of State, to dismiss the suit against them. How have they interpreted those facts? I believe they have interpreted them as immunity. If the United States government won't take action in a case as serious and severe as this, that was, the word is overused, but was a transitional event in the history of the United States, what else will it take for Saudi Arabia to do before the United States government would be involved? And I think that the response that has come from that answer is we will continue to fund, as we have, the major terrorist organizations, and we will continue to fund mosques and madrasas, Saudi schools, which are training the next generation of terrorists. The two things that any terrorist organization depends upon is a consistent flow of money and recruits. Saudi Arabia is providing both of those. But I think the third reason why this is important is our democracy. There was a recent report from Dartmouth College of a study of what is the impact of secrecy, particularly focusing on the 28 pages, to the American people. And the answer is the result is cynicism and suspicion, that the American people are losing confidence that their government is abiding by the essential compact of democracy, that the people will give their respect to the government, and the government will give its respect to the people by letting them know what the government is doing in their name.
Lastly, tonight, I want you to hear from FBI whistleblower attorney Colleen Rowley, because again, the mainstream media never really wanted you to be informed about her powerful testimony and her whistleblowing. Ms. Rowley reveals all the prior knowledge that the FBI had of pending possible terrorist attacks with jetliners before 9/11, and how Director Bob Mueller, again, ran interference and repeatedly refused to allow field agents, especially from her office in Minneapolis, to get the FISA search warrants they were begging for until it was too late. Let's go ahead and roll that clip.
If you remember after 9/11, Connie Bryan said, well, and there's a movie out right now called 9/11 Press for Truth. Has anyone seen it? Anyone? It's actually a pretty good movie. It's a little documentary. It's called 9/11 Press for Truth, and they have all that old footage of Connie Bryan saying, well, I don't think anyone would have known that someone would hijack a plane and fly it into a building. Guess what? All kinds of people knew. There had been prior plots. I mean, you start looking at this. Actually, Connie Rice herself had been involved in protection for the G8. They had even exercises along these lines. There had been anyways, there was all, that was one thing. Our FBI director said something for about 3 weeks. He said, well, no one could have prevented 9/11. If we had had any idea, maybe we could have prevented 9/11. If we'd had any inkling of this. And of course, he was actually called on the day of 9/11 about the Moussaoui case. The agents in Minnesota were so worried that the case itself would be covered up. In order to prevent this embarrassment that, that there was a terrorist connection already known, and there are things about this terrorist connection. For instance, our acting supervisor, August 23rd, 24th, in arguing with headquarters to go for this warrant, and the guy was saying, no, we can't do it. Our acting supervisor had said, this is a guy who could fly into the World Trade Center. And that was said in August 2001. Can you imagine how embarrassing this is? And of course, Mueller knows it. He knows that was even said very quickly. Now, and of course, so for 3 weeks, he's saying, well, if we had known, we may have been able to prevent it. I tried to call the director, and this is after 9/11, to get him to stop saying that, because I said, oh my gosh, when this comes out. And I knew there had been emails flying between our office and headquarters. I didn't know there were 70 emails. When our agent testified recently in the Moussaoui case, it comes out there's 60, 70 emails. I knew that the communication that they had tried to seek was several pages long and included a lot of facts. And I knew I knew a lot of the arguments that had taken place, but I didn't know all of it. So when he said that, I tried to call the director's office, and I got to somebody where I know he knew, because he had just been in that office and they would tell him and stuff. And of course, he continued to say it. He continued to say it until the case leaked to the press. And the case leaked to the press. One of our agents, or one of our supervisors, was testifying in Congress, and the press learned of it. I think it was Newsweek, I can't remember, and they started asking him questions of embarrassing things. He was almost caught, and again, with this lying thing, he was very close to being caught in outright not telling Congress the truth because he was going with what he thought he had to say.
And don't forget, Mueller was assigned to this Trump investigation with his connections in Russia and documented so many of the collusions between Trump and Putin, and then refused to act on it. So you start following that thread, and it just, some light bulbs really start to go on, making you realize that there's something wrong, that something smells really corrupt. Unfortunately, we're out of time for this episode tonight, but this is a to be continued on future episodes for sure, okay? And also, don't forget to check out my original 1 hour special on this topic way back in 2006. I was one of the early people who was talking a lot about the fact that the story we were told about 9/11, the narrative we were being given was wrong, was a lie, and was corrupt. So just go on YouTube and search Connie Bryan and Eric Huffschmidt, and you'll find that. I hope you'll check that out. All right, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.